How many hours a day do you have to work to develop a physique like that?
Well, most bodybuilders train at least 3 hours a day, 6 days a week, but I only train a total of 3 hours a week.
Okay, what do you do during those hours?
Train very hard.
What type of training? Working mainly on weights?
Yeah, barbells, dumbbells, so forth.
What's the most you lift?
About 1,200 pounds.
Although there are many camps in early bodybuilding, there are mainly two. One was mostly led by Arnold, which emphasized high number of sets, high reps, and overall high volume training, even going to a gym 2, maybe even 3 times per day. The other, however, was led by Mike Mentzer. He emphasized low volume training, with very few sets, but each set is taken beyond failure. He called it quote-unquote heavy-duty training. Although his training methods have always been semi-popular, they've had a huge resurgence recently, which brings up the question, was Mike Mentzer right? Mike Mentzer pretty much single-handedly created science-based lifting. Before him, yes, there were some scientists who were into bodybuilding, but he truly popularized it. He always mentioned several studies within his training. He would also infamously give many lectures and talks about the low volume training, going into deep depth about it, some which lasted 1 to 2, maybe even 3 hour long lectures. However, here were his core ideas. 1. That one set was sufficient for each exercise. He believed one set was pretty much all sufficient because the law of diminishing return, i.e. if you do any more, it's not really doing anything, you're kind of wasting your time, as well as hindering your ability to recover. 2. Each one of these sets should be taken to absolute failure. He believed maximum effort yields maximum results, i.e. if you don't push fully hard, you won't get the results that you want, and this one set becomes null. 3. Recovery is everything. He believed recovery is what builds your muscle, i.e. there are 2 reasons you aren't growing. 1. You aren't training hard enough, or 2. You aren't recovering enough. And then 4. Progressive overload. Increase your weight and reps over time. Even though you're only doing 1 set per exercise, you should be able to increase the weight or reps each time you work out. So, how do these 4 principles stand up? Well, the first principle stands up somewhat well when it comes to compound movements. However, for isolation work, it simply just doesn't stand up, especially when it comes to smaller muscle groups. Something like a bicep curl or a lateral raise, you can't just do 1 set of, simply because your biceps and side delts can take more than just that, as well as they simply just require more to grow. Meanwhile, something like the squat or deadlift, this might work since it's such a large compound movement, especially if you account for the fact that Mike Mentzer wants you to take it to absolute failure. However, if you're simply low on time in a gym, 1 set per exercise is actually very good, as it gets a decent load on your body while not taking up too much time. Now, when it comes to the absolute failure principle, I genuinely think he was onto something, at least in the vast majority of cases, especially when it comes to isolation exercises, stuff like the bicep curl, lateral raise, tricep press down, or cable fly. You want to go to absolute failure. Now, when it comes to a squat or deadlift, I think it goes for pretty much most trainees to say, this is probably a bad idea, since they bite back more than you realize. So overall, I say you should go to failure in pretty much every single exercise, except the squat, deadlift, and maybe leg press. However, one thing I applaud this training for is how injury risk free it actually is. Simply due to the fact you aren't being Arnold and doing 50 sets per exercise pretty much, while all of them to absolute failure, which increases your risk for injury. Although it does come with a caveat if you do his actual training plan, which what I show on screen was actually his training plan. I wouldn't recommend doing 6 reps of lateral raises. It's probably a bad idea. For principle 3 and 4, he really was on point. If you don't properly recover, you will not gain muscle whatsoever, as recovery is literally when you gain muscle, and if you completely fumble recovery, you will gain absolutely no muscle whatsoever. As well as if you don't increase the weight and reps over time, you will also gain no muscle whatsoever and are spinning your wheels in the gym for literally no reason. One last thing before I do my conclusion, he had an idea on protein. He believed that protein is overrated and that you need to only eat a little bit more protein than you should, i.e. like 7 grams more than you normally would. Overall, I'd say he's right. Protein generally is overrated for bodybuilding. However, introducing only 7 extra grams, that's absurd, quite frankly. A lot of YouTubers these days like to hate on Mike Mentzer, but overall, I generally think he was on point. You should be taking most of your sets to absolute failure. You should be emphasizing recovery, even taking a day or a couple days off from the gym, as well as you should be doing progressive overload. However, the 1 set was really where he was off, as 1 set might work, as I said, for compound movements. When it comes to isolation movements, and even compound movements, you should be doing 2, 3, maybe even 4 sets. But, to answer the title of this video, was Mike Mentzer right? Mostly, yeah. Anyway, I'll end this thing here. Thank you for watching. And yeah, thanks for watching. Probably a video on the Arnold split eventually. Maybe I'll be reviewing other bodybuilder styles like Ronnie Coleman, Dorian Yates, who's actually very similar to Mike Mentzer, or even Arnold's training style. Keep in mind there's actually a difference between the Arnold split and Arnold's training style. But yeah, I'll end this thing here. Thank you for watching. See you next time, and bye.
Check out my new favorite channel. It is so good. Oh my god. Look at it.